Okay, let's unpack this. The headlines lately have been something else. I mean, intense, moving at lightning speed.
Absolutely. Just relentless.
We're talking about Iran and Israel, of course.
Yeah.
Direct exchanges, escalating threats, near misses. And now, well, these deeply concerning reports coming out in June 2025.
It really is a lot to keep up with.
Yeah, and if you feel like the ground is shifting under our feet constantly, you are absolutely not alone.
The rapid pace of recent events, particularly over the last year and spilling right into this month, June 2025, it just underscores how quickly things can pivot.
Pivot from what, like simmering, often deniable tensions?
Exactly, that shadow war, right into overt state-on-state confrontation. It's a major shift.
And this isn't just a simple bilateral conflict, is it, between just two countries? I mean, it's tempting to frame it that way, maybe?
Oh, definitely not. That would be missing the bigger picture entirely.
So this deep dive, we're really focusing on that incredibly complex, rapidly evolving dynamic between Iran and Israel, looking specifically at, well, 2024 and the early part of 2025.
Right, and what makes it so complicated, as you said, is it's not just confined to Tehran and Tel Aviv. It involves this tangled web of proxies.
It's a huge factor, the proxies.
Other powerful regional actors, Saudi Arabia being a key one, obviously, and even major global players, the US, Russia, European powers, whose actions are both shaping and being shaped by this rivalry. It's all interconnected.
Okay, so to help us navigate all this complexity, try and get a handle on it, we've pulled from a pretty substantial stack of sources today.
We have indeed. We've got detailed reports from some heavy hitters in the think tank world, places like the Institute for the Study of War, the Middle East Institute.
Yes, solid analysis there. And we're also looking at economic impacts, right? We've got analysis from ING Think and Lloyd's List, which is crucial given the energy and shipping dimensions.
Absolutely. Plus, security insights from the Washington Institute Montaigne. And even, a foundational overview from a Wikipedia source, just to ground us in the basic history, gives us different angles.
So our mission today really is to dig into these sources, try to stitch together the crucial timeline of what's actually happened, understand the strategies involved, especially Iran's use of proxies, which is fascinating and, let's be honest, often really risky.
Definitely risky, high stakes.
And see how this conflict isn't happening in a vacuum. It connects to broader regional power struggles, international dynamics, things that affect way more than just Iran and Israel.
So think of this as your essential guide, a shortcut, maybe, to getting properly informed on what is, well, undeniably one of the most crucial and dangerous global flashpoints right now.
All right, let's start by setting the stage then. What were the roots of this recent, really intense period of tension? This level of direct exchange didn't just appear overnight, did it?
No, it really didn't. Our sources pretty much unanimously point to the Gaza war starting starkly with that Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023, as a major catalyst.
Right, the catalyst for the rapid escalation we've seen between Iran and Israel specifically.
Exactly. That horrific attack, resulting in almost 1,200 Israeli deaths, mostly civilians, initiated the war in Gaza. And following that, Israel began targeting Iranian personnel and proxy forces, particularly in Syria, much more frequently.
Often described as retaliation, right? For the actions of Iran-backed groups more broadly.
Yes, that was the context given. And we saw that pattern, the targeting and retaliation cycle, escalate very quickly with some extremely high-profile killings.
Like that Israeli airstrike in Syria, December 25th, 2023. Assassinated Iranian commander Razi Mousavi.
And at the time, our sources noted he was the highest-ranking Iranian military official killed since the U.S. strike on Qasem Soleimani back in 2020. Well, right up until General Mohammad Reza Zahedi was killed later in 2024.
And it wasn't isolated, was it? Other IRGC members, that's Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were also killed in Syria around then. I think a fifth member died in January 2024.
Correct. These weren't just, low-level fighters. These were figures within Iran's command structure operating in Syria. Their deaths signaled a real intensification, a more direct targeting approach by Israel.
Okay, so the Gaza war aftermath, clearly a proximate cause, a major driver of the immediate heightened tension. But our sources also highlight something deeper, don't they? A more fundamental strategic shift happening even before this recent peak in 2024.
Yes, a significant change in Iran's strategy, particularly concerning its relationship with, Saudi Arabia.
This seems really crucial for context. The source from International Affairs goes into some depth here.
But it does. Historically, if you look back, say, to the end of the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, Iran actually pursued a strategy of detente, basically, easing tensions, engaging diplomatically with Saudi Arabia.
Which seems counterintuitive now, but The goal then was tactical.
Primarily tactical, yes. Iran wanted to try and divide the U.S.-led anti-Iran coalition that had formed, partly during the war. Engaging with Riyadh was a way to potentially pull them away from that tight U.S. orbit, create some breathing room.
Right, trying to make space for themselves regionally by being less overtly confrontational with the major Sunni power. But that calculation shifted dramatically, especially after the Arab Spring, starting around 2010-2011.
Exactly. The period after the Arab Spring fundamentally changed the regional landscape. Iran started perceiving a growing threat from what it saw as a newly assertive Saudi regional policy.
What were the factors driving that perception?
Several key things. The widespread instability and power vacuums created by the uprisings across the region, for one. Then there was the U.S. adopting what was termed leading from behind under President Obama,
which many in the region, including the Saudis, felt made the U.S. less reliable as a security guarantor.
Right, precisely. Add to that the negotiation of the nuclear deal, which Riyadh viewed with deep suspicion, and critically, the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. He pursued a much more proactive, even confrontational regional policy than previous Saudi leaders.
So Iran looked at this new landscape. A more assertive Saudi Arabia, a less predictable region, a seemingly less committed U.S., and decided the old detente strategy wasn't just ineffective, it was potentially dangerous.
That's the assessment. The sources describe a decisive shift, a new Iranian strategy emerging, prioritizing not engagement, but the containment of Saudi Arabia.
Containment. That became the core objective.
Yes, and this translated into concrete actions, actively confronting Saudi interests and influence in various regional arenas. Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq became key battlegrounds for this rivalry.
And this period also saw Saudi Arabia pushing hard for stringent economic sanctions against Iran internationally.
Absolutely. The rivalry intensified on multiple fronts, diplomatic, economic, and through proxies.
And from the Saudi side, our sources say they felt this profound need to diversify partnerships, become more self-reliant,
Sure.
because they saw the U.S. as less reliable.
That's clearly indicated. Turki al-Faisal, a prominent Saudi figure, is quoted expressing exactly that, questioning how much they could really rely on U.S. leadership in a crisis. They wanted to demonstrate agency, not be seen as free riders just relying on the U.S. That perception seemed to genuinely drive their more assertive stance.
So this strategic shift towards containment, it provides this critical long-term backdrop for understanding the ongoing rivalry, doesn't it? It goes way beyond just the direct Iran-Israel tensions grabbing headlines.
Absolutely. It's a deep, competitive struggle for influence across the entire Middle East, with Saudi Arabia and Iran backing rival sides everywhere.
And central to Iran's regional strategy, how it executes this containment policy, projects power without necessarily using its own conventional forces on a large scale, is its proxy model. This is fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental to their approach.
So let's take that deeper dive into the proxy model. Where did this distinct Iranian approach using non-state armed groups actually come from?
Well, the sources trace the strategy all the way back to the 1979 revolution itself. Almost immediately after taking power, the Islamic Republic began cultivating, inciting violent, radical, often sectarian non-state groups across the region. It was part of the revolutionary export idea.
And Ayatollah Khomeini, the architect of the revolution, added a very deliberate sectarian layer to this.
Yes, a distinct Shia layer. Having spent years in exile in Iraq under Saddam's Sunni Ba'athist government, Khomeini was acutely aware of the large Shia population there. He quickly tried to incite them against Saddam's regime.
And the source from MEI notes Khomeini viewed Arab nationalism, like Saddam's Baathism, as inherently biased, even hostile, towards Shia populations.
Correct. So it wasn't just about finding anti-establishment groups. It was about leveraging and mobilizing Shia identity under his revolutionary banner. And by 1982, this was already bearing significant fruit. Iran played a key role in helping establish groups like the Badr Corps in Iraq and, famously, Hezbollah in Lebanon. These groups were deliberately comprised of Shia Islamist activists who embraced Khomeini's revolutionary doctrine.
And critically, both remain exceptionally successful and loyal proxies for Iran, even today, decades later.
That longevity, that success, it points to something more than just transactional support, doesn't it? There is a strong ideological component right from the start.
And the sources highlight this persistent blend. Ideological commitment mixed with pragmatic, real-world strategic goals in Iran's proxy strategy.
Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who sets the direction now, he views these ideological and financial investments in proxies as absolutely fundamental, inseparable from what he sees as the overarching conflict with the United States.
His view being that the U.S. objective isn't just policy disagreement, but the fundamental overthrow of the Iranian political system.
Exactly. His vision emphasizes Iran must remain revolutionary, actively promoting what he calls original Islam against, well, American Islam.
It's a powerful framing device. He applies that American Islam label to domestic opponents, but also to neighboring states whose approaches differ from Iran's revolutionary path.
Precisely. It creates this very specific, almost black and white worldview that justifies their actions. And the militia model itself, using these non-state groups, is presented in the sources as integral, foundational to the Iranian blueprint since '79.
Including not just arms and money, but also dedicated ideological indoctrination for the fighters within these groups.
Yes, it's about building a network based on shared revolutionary zeal, not just military capability. It's been a core, consistent tool in their foreign policy arsenal for over 40 years.
All right, so we have the foundations. Gaza war is a recent trigger. The deeper strategic shift towards containing Saudi Arabia and Iran's established ideologically driven proxy model. Now let's walk through the key escalation points in 2024. Things got really volatile, setting the stage for where we are now in June 2025. Spring 2024 was particularly tense.
It really kicked off dramatically in April 2024. April 1st, Israel was accused of that deadly strike on Iran's consulate complex in Damascus, Syria.
And important to note, this wasn't just any building. It was part of the diplomatic compound, right? And the strike killed several senior Iranian military figures.
Yes. Iran immediately held Israel responsible, unequivocally, and pledged to reciprocate when we want, signaling a response was coming, but on their terms.
And this strike killed top general Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a key IRGC Quds force figure for Syria and Lebanon, along with others. A significant targeting of leadership outside Iran.
A very significant hit. Then, April 13th, we saw Iran's troops raid and seize the MSC Ares, that Israel-linked container ship near the UAE in the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran cited violating maritime laws, but the timing made the connection clear. Prompted Israel's foreign minister to call for sanctions on the IRGC.
Exactly. It brought the maritime domain, a vital global trade artery, right into the conflict. And then, the main event. The unprecedented direct Iranian strikes on Israel over April 13th, 14th.
Yeah, this was a huge moment, a real departure from the usual shadow war. It started with Hezbollah hitting northern Israel with about 40 rockets.
Which Israel responded to. But the main event was Iran and its proxies launching that massive wave, around 300 drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles directly towards Israel.
And crucially, it wasn't just Iran launching from its own territory. Sources confirm it was coordinated, involving several proxies.
Yes. The Houthis from Yemen, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, the Badr organization, the True Promise Corps, all reportedly operating under Iranian command or coordination for this specific attack. Even Syria got involved, its air defenses reportedly shooting down some Israeli interceptors.
What was really notable, though, and maybe saved the situation from blowing up even more right then, was the robust international defense effort.
Absolutely remarkable. The US, the UK, Jordan actively intercepted over 100 Iranian drones outside Israeli airspace. France deployed its navy, and sources indicate Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states reportedly provided critical intelligence and allowed airspace use. A collective defense effort.
And the impact in Israel, compared to the scale of the attack, was surprisingly minor.
Remarkably so. Minor damage to Nevatim Air Base, but it stayed operational. Tragically, the most serious casualty was a 7-year-old Israeli Bedouin child critically injured by shrapnel. Beyond that, 31 others had minor injuries, mostly from rushing to shelters or anxiety.
Overall, very little physical damage. Estimates suggest 99% of projectiles were downed or failed.
Which was a critical outcome. It significantly shaped Israel's response options. On April 19th, Israel retaliated.
Maintaining their usual policy of ambiguity, no official comment. But sources indicated strikes near Isfahan International Airport in Iran.
That's right, hitting a military base and significantly a radar system specifically associated with the Natanz nuclear site. Iran initially claimed it shot everything down, but satellite images reportedly showed damage to an air defense battery and that radar system.
So hitting something linked to a nuclear site, even without claiming it, sends a clear message. And there were simultaneous strikes in Syria, explosions in Iraq, suggestions Israel fired from or over Iraq.
Yes, the response was multi-pronged, though kept relatively limited compared to what it could have been.
And the aftermath saw intense debate in Israel's war cabinet, balancing deterrence with massive international pressure to de-escalate.
Huge pressure. There were even those credible reports of a potential U.S. deal. green light for Rafah in Gaza in exchange for Israel not striking Iran further right then. Shows the high-stakes trade-offs happening.
And the international community tightened sanctions on Iran's missile and drone programs. A regional intel source apparently assessed direct state-to-state strikes were over for the moment. Clearly a temporary assessment.
Very temporary, as it turned out. The U.S. also significantly bolstered its military posture around then. More F-22s, thousands of Marines, Carrier Strike Group 9 in the Gulf, amphibious assault ships in the Med.
Carrier Strike Group 3 from the Pacific, too. A major concentration of U.S. naval power.
Clearly signaling readiness not just to defend Israel, but protect U.S. interests. And U.S. diplomacy was working overtime, messaging Iran, warning future attacks might not be intercepted so effectively. Even Putin reportedly urged Khamenei towards restraint, especially regarding civilians.
Okay, that covers that intense April period. But our sources mention escalation continued through the summer and fall of 2024. It wasn't a one-off.
No, it indicated a persistent, elevated state of tension, even if the details for those specific months are less granular in our materials.
We know July 31st saw those major assassinations.
Yeah.
Hezbollah commander Fouad Shukr in Lebanon, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Both Iran and Hezbollah immediately pledged retaliation.
Setting the stage for future responses, absolutely. August-September are noted as having heightened tensions, then specific Israel-Hezbollah escalations between Sep 17th and 30th, though not detailed.
Then, another direct state-on-state round in October. October 1st, Iran launched missiles at Israel. We heard about the tragic death of Nissim Zarqa and Afula during that attack.
A heartbreaking reminder of the human cost. And Israel retaliated again with strikes on Iran, October 26th. The sources mention more post-strike threats, Iraqi involvement around Aknovorno, suggesting militias there continue to be a platform.
So while April was maybe the most dramatic documented flashpoint, the conflict clearly kept simmering and erupting through 2024.
Definitely not a contained incident.
Let's pivot back now and really dive deeper into Iran's proxy strategy. It's so central to how they operate, how they confront Israel, navigate rivalries.
It's not just a tool, it's core to their entire foreign policy architecture. This network, often called the axis of resistance, is described as potent, but also, as you said, really risky for Tehran.
And Syria is identified as a key state member, right? Providing logistical depth, geographic positioning, and they strengthen ties with groups like the Houthis in Yemen, expanding the network's reach significantly.
Hugely expanding it. Okay, let's break down some key proxy groups based on our sources. Hezbollah in Lebanon, arguably the oldest, most successful, most well-known.
Right. Anti-Saddam origins, like some Iraqi groups, deeply embedded in Lebanon's political and security structure now, involved in continuous skirmishes during the Gaza war, fired rockets in April.
And the sources note that close relationship with the Houthis, Nasrallah welcoming their delegation in Beirut, the main Houthi TV station, Al Masirah, being based in Beirut, likely with Hezbollah's help, and they're central to the current clashes on the Blue Line.
Then you have the significant Iraqi groups. The Badr Corps, also with anti-Saddam origins, still influential in Iraq's security and politics.
Yes, and beyond Badr, others explicitly named in the April attacks. Islamic Resistance in Iraq, Badr Organization, True Promise Corps, all reportedly acting under Iranian coordination.
And the sources give some really concerning insights into Iranian influence in Iraq, beyond just the military stuff, particularly around the upcoming November 2025 elections.
Yeah, serious accusations of alleged electoral fraud involving Iranian-backed parties in the Shia coordination framework. Leaked recordings reportedly implicate leaders of powerful militias like Asai al-Haq, AAH.
That's a faction within the Islamic resistance in Iraq.
Correct. Reportedly threatening members to vote for their political wing, Sedequin. There are also claims about university officials linked to politicians telling students to vote certain ways for academic benefits. It paints a picture of influence extending deep into political manipulation, leveraging social institutions.
That's a level of penetration far beyond just arming militias. It's shaping the internal politics. Now, the Houthis in Yemen, the sources provide interesting context on Iran's historical ties, or lack thereof, considering their recent prominence.
This is important. While the Houthis are Zaydi Shia, the sources stress they don't have the same deep sociocultural or theological links to Iran's 12-verse Shi'ism as Hezbollah or many Iraqi groups. And Yemen wasn't historically a high priority for Iran.
They were fighting the Yemeni army independently long before the Arab Spring.
Exactly. Iran didn't really interfere or support them in earlier wars, even when Saudi Arabia got involved against them in 2009-2010. This strongly suggests Iran's current deeper support is a more recent strategic development, directly tied to that Saudi containment strategy we discussed.
Not some long-standing ideological alliance.
Right. Initially, the Houthis fought largely alone post-Arab Spring. By late 2014, they gained dominance in Sana'a after Saudi-backed efforts failed. When Saudi Arabia intervened in March 2015, accusing them of advancing Iran's agenda, it ironically created the conditions for a closer Houthi-Iran relationship.
And Iran seized that strategic opportunity. A low-cost, high-impact way to pressure Saudi Arabia right on their southern border.
Precisely. Tehran hasn't officially confirmed direct military support beyond advisory, though reports of weapons shipments persist. Former IRGC Commander Jafari claimed in 2018 it was just advisory and moral level. Interestingly, earlier U.S. investigations suggested Houthis initially got weapons from the Yemeni black market or army stockpiles, not Iran.
But over time, Axis of Resistance members did strengthen ties. Some Iraqi militias even publicly expressed willingness to fight alongside Yemenis against Saudis back in 2016.
And Ansar Allah controversially claimed the 2019 Aramco strike so that U.S. and Saudis blamed Iran. Later, Iran's Joint Chiefs Head Bagheri did state more explicitly they provided advisory support to Ansar Allah.
And attacks on Saudi targets continued: oil facilities, bases, airports, like that Jeddah attack in November 2020. More recently, and crucially, they've expanded targeting to Israel and international shipping in the Red Sea.
Which has had profound economic impact, shipping traffic down maybe 60%, forcing ships around Africa, driving up charter rates, insurance, disrupting oil and gas flows. Huge concern around the Strait of Hormuz, too.
Not just oil, but European gas markets, too, right?
Yeah.
Qatar ships LNG through Hormuz. Disruptions could cause deficits, price competition between Europe and Asia.
Absolutely. And this shipping disruption prompted the U.S. and allies, UK, Bahrain, to resume strikes in Yemen and form that Operation Prosperity Guardian coalition to protect Red Sea routes. Risk remains high, economic impact ongoing.
Other proxies mentioned: Fatimiyun, Afghans recruited in Iran, and Zinabiyun, Pakistanis, both heavily used in Syria.
Yes, and the casualty figures from Syria between 2012-2018 are telling. Sources note more Afghans and Lebanese died there than Iranians, despite Iran's larger population.
That statistic is a key insight. Suggests Iran is reluctant to commit its own manpower abroad, heavily relying on financial incentives and sectarian messaging to recruit non-Iranians to fight its battles.
Points to a potential vulnerability, right, regarding domestic support for these interventions. Finally, Hamas, partially funded by Iran, though Iran denies being its ideological godfather, Hania's killing in Tehran highlights the connection, whatever its exact nature.
Okay, a complex proxy web. Let's look at Iran's support for the Syrian government itself.
Iran was Assad's steadfast ally, crucial military support, training, advice, pushing back Saudi-sponsored militias. Key strategy: establishing the National Defense Forces, NDF, modeled on Iran's besiege. Recruited maybe 100,000 fighters across sectarian lines within Syria, critical in battles like Aleppo, Homs, Latakia.
So helping Syria build indigenous capacity based on the Iranian model, not just sending foreign fighters.
Exactly. Later, they fully integrated foreign Shia militias and coordinated with Russia, which provided that vital air and diplomatic umbrella. Saudi Arabia eventually lost its regime change gamble there, reduced its footprint by 2018, a major strategic win for Iran and its coalition.
Given all this investment, financial, ideological, military, political, across so many theaters, what about the costs versus benefits for Iran itself?
The sources raise a fundamental question. Is this high-cost commitment potentially dubious, even detrimental to the Iranian nation as a whole, not just the regime? That heavy reliance on non-Iranians fighting suggests a lack of mainstream public support for these interventions, especially when framed as vital for national security.
So the cost isn't just financial drain, it's potentially a deep political risk. Severe popular backlash inside Iran.
Precisely. Khamenei and the IRGC's calculations are shaped by this internal cost-benefit, even if downplayed publicly. The proxy model's utility only holds as long as perceived external benefits, regional influence, deterrence, containing rivals, outweigh the significant costs, financial and domestic political risk.
Which leads to suggestions on countering Iranian influence. The idea being the West, U.S. regional rivals should consider this domestic context, that the Iranian nation might resent the costly ideological mission.
Yes, the core idea. Tehran's drive for dominance might rest on a fragile internal political economic basis. If so, maybe influencing Iran's behavior is more possible if seen as having defined interests, not just an open-ended ideology.
And specific advice for Sunni neighbors like Saudi Arabia, UAE. Continue appealing to non-Islamist Shia Arabs, because treating all Shia as proxies backfired, pushed many towards Tehran.
Exactly, a call for a more nuanced, less sectarian approach, recognizing diversity within Arab Shia communities, not assuming identity equals loyalty to Tehran.
Okay, let's broaden out again. Connect this Iran-Israel dynamic and the proxy wars to the wider regional and international picture. We've touched on the Iran-Saudi rivalry. How does that keep playing out beyond proxies?
Sources describe it as fierce, competitive brinkmanship across the whole Middle East, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Qatar, Bahrain, backing rival sides in local politics. And it's taking on increasingly interconnected international dimensions.
Like the 2019 Aramco strikes. Ansarullah claimed it, but many pointed to Iran. Showed regional rivalries have immediate global economic consequences, right? Impacting energy security for everyone.
Absolutely. Demonstrated Iran's capability to hit its rivals' economic heartland. Now, what about the big international actors beyond their role in the April interceptions? The U.S. is key, but has a complicated position.
Sources are pretty critical, suggesting the U.S. lost credibility, setting perceived blank check to Israel post-October 7th, opposition to a Gaza ceasefire for months.
Despite that critique, the U.S. has simultaneously prioritized strengthening ties with Saudi Arabia, picking up Trump's normalization efforts. A duality. Deep engagement with Israel while pursuing Arab-Israel normalization and stronger Riyadh ties.
It's a constant balancing act. Post-October 7th, the U.S. role became much more active militarily, to more arms to Israel, emphasizing allyship, the deployments we discussed, resuming Houthi strikes, building the Red Sea coalition.
But overlaying all this, the U.S. presidential election in November's 2024 creates huge uncertainty. Sources mention the glooming perspective of a potential Trump return, making future U.S. actions unpredictable for everyone in the region.
And U.S. military spending priorities give context. The 2022 National Defense Strategy focuses on deterring Russia-China, integrated deterrence. Huge spending in 2024, $246 billion for that, including nuclear modernization, missile defense.
Plus big money for F-35s, new ships, supplemental spending also revealing massive $48 4Bs for Ukraine, $10.06 for Israel, funds for Indo-Pacific Taiwan, alongside $3 3Bs for CENTCOM covering the Middle East.
Shows the global strategic landscape influences U.S. resources, even as the Middle East pulls them back in deeply post-October 7th. What about the UK?
Played a role beyond April interceptions. PM Sunak confirmed RAF jets shot down Iranian drones. IDF chief thanked his UK counterpart. UK joined the Red Sea coalition.
And UK military spending is rising, 2.3% of GDP now, aiming for 2.5% by 2027, maybe 3% long-term.
Yes, plus significant long-term military aid pledged to Ukraine, while reportedly cutting overseas development aid to fund it.
France was another key European player in April.
Deployed its navy, Rafale jets neutralized drones over Jordan. French military spending also up significantly, 2.1% of GDP in 2024, aligned with their push for strategic autonomy, adapting industry to a war economy.
And like the UK, significant bilateral aid pledged to Ukraine. The sources also highlight UK-France defense cooperation.
Yes, noted as two very similar geopolitical powers in Europe. Comparable capabilities, nuclear powers, projection forces, UNSC seats, big defense spenders, NATO members, face common threats like Islamist terrorism.
So proposals for deeper cooperation, like on the Future Combat Air System, FCAS, next-gen aircraft, acknowledging no single European country can build it alone.
Exactly. Seen as essential for future warfare, European capability, cybersecurity cooperation also proposed joint doctrine capabilities, task force seen as central strategically despite UK's Five Eyes links. Officer exchanges also key for future cooperation.
Jordan was directly involved in April, geographically positioned between Iran and Israel.
Yes, its air defenses were active, shot down dozens of Iranian drones transiting its airspace. And sadly, sources mention 3 people injured there on June 14, 2025, by falling debris shows the spillover risk.
All this regional activity, shifting alliances, proxy warfare, global power involvement, it's happening within what sources call a fragmenting international order, moving from U.S. unipolarity towards multipolarity.
That's the framing. China, Russia challenging U.S. dominance globally and regionally. regional powers like Turkey, Iran seeking more prominent roles.
And recent normalization deals are seen by some analysts as symptomatic of this fragmentation, happening without addressing core issues like the Palestinian struggle, lacking a shared regional vision.
Right, suggesting traditional international frameworks can't enforce one. The Gaza war itself is seen by some as profoundly shattering remnants of the international order, maybe as influential as 9/11 in shifting paradigms. But potentially, this fragmentation is also an opportunity for regional actors to develop a new order based on their own interests.
All this conflict and uncertainty must have major economic impacts.
Absolutely. Elevated geopolitical uncertainty means energy markets price in risk. After the April strikes, oil rallied maybe 13%, gave some back. But the market needs a larger risk premium now, keeping prices higher even without disruption.
And the really severe scenario.
Major disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, critical choke point, nearly a third of global seaborne oil. Could spike prices dramatically, maybe 120 barrel or more. OPEC spare capacity mostly inside the Gulf, so vulnerable too. Would rely on strategic reserves, demand destruction.
Impacts beyond oil, European gas.
Serious ramifications. Qatar ships huge amounts of LNG through Hormuz. Disruptions could mean global LNG deficits, intense competition between Europe and Asia.
And broader economic effects, say in the Eurozone.
Makes things harder for central banks. Lower energy prices helped lower inflation recently. That's now at risk. Higher costs hit manufacturing, confidence, consumers save, firms delay investment, escalation weighs on growth.
Potentially leading to stagflation, stagnant growth, rising inflation.
Exactly. An ECB scenario suggests even a 20% energy price spike cuts growth, adds to inflation significantly, complicates central bank responses.
What about financial markets? Credit.
Interestingly, sources say credit markets have largely ignored this recently, driven more by technicals, liquidity. An immediate escalation might widen spreads slightly, but they could revert if tensions don't worsen further unless there's a major disruption like Hormuz.
We mentioned Syria as part of Iran's axis. A specific detail about their role in the April strikes.
Yes, curious detail. Syrian defenses reportedly targeted Israeli missiles, which were engaging Iranian missiles heading for the Golan Heights. Suggests coordination, or at least active positioning, reinforcing Assad's alignment with Iran.
And the Lebanese-Israeli border, simmering for months.
Exchanges across the Blue Line have intensified significantly since October 7th. High risk of miscalculation. Talks focus on Hezbollah withdrawal south of the Litani River per UNSC Resolution 1701 from 2006.
That resolution called for a ceasefire, LAF deployment south, Israeli withdrawal, strengthened UNIFIL demilitarized zone.
Right. Israel's primary interest, safe return of its displaced northern population. Without Hezbollah retreating, the threat of broader Israeli military intervention persists. Israel feels it needs demonstrable wins after Gaza challenges.
And Lebanese domestic politics impact Hezbollah's strategy. The presidential debate, their candidate Frangi.
Yes. Maintaining tension in the south but avoiding full-scale war is reportedly used by Hezbollah as a bargaining chip domestically, demonstrates their leverage.
So they're concerned about expanding clashes, losing fighters, undermining prestige. But full war alienates supporters, devastates infrastructure.
Exactly. They know full war is catastrophic for Lebanon. This complex domestic calculation seems to push them towards some strategic restraint. Maintain pressure, avoid total war.
Highlights the complex constraints even powerful proxies face. Now let's turn to the dimension raising the stakes incredibly high. The nuclear dimension. Recent headlines are deeply concerning.
Yes, this is where the risk feels particularly acute. Sources specifically mention Israeli strikes on June 13, 2025, reportedly targeting Iran's nuclear program and military sites.
Killing top military officials, and according to Israeli military statements cited, 9 Iranian nuclear scientists and experts.
That's the claim. This follows the April 19, 2024 strike near Isfahan that hit a radar linked to the Natanz enrichment site. The pattern shows Iran's nuclear facilities and personnel are seen as targets by Israel.
And significant activity with the IAEA, the UN watchdog.
Yes. The IAEA censure of Iran in November 2024 for failing to cooperate fully. Iran's defiant response, announcing installation of over 6,000 more advanced centrifuges. A pattern. Pressure leads to technical acceleration.
And more recently, the IAEA Board of Governors meeting June 9-13, 2025. US and E3 planning a non-compliance resolution based on a May report citing less than satisfactory cooperation.
Right. And Iran explicitly responded by preparing a list of countermeasures, including technical ones, widely seen as threats to further escalate its program, restrict inspectors, install more centrifuges, enrich to higher levels. Deeply concerning cycle.
Underlying all this, the risk of Iran pursuing a nuclear weapon breakout.
Yes. Described as a potential pivotal choice if Iran feels cornered. Experts suggest they could potentially get fissile material for a weapon within months if they dashed for it. Sources assess this would fundamentally alter the regional balance and almost certainly trigger U.S. military intervention, the ultimate red line.
And Iran issued its own nuclear threats.
On June 9, 2025, after a reported Trump-Netanyahu call, Iran's Supreme National Security Council warned it would target Israel's covert nuclear facilities if Israel struck Iran's. Claimed a treasure trove of intel on Israeli sites.
Analysts assess this as likely an information operation. To deter the IAEA resolution, U.S.-Israeli strikes, snapback sanctions.
That's the assessment. A dangerous game of nuclear brinkmanship via public threats.
And contextually, that Israeli far-right minister mentioning nuking Gaza in November 2023, though condemned and suspended, highlights extreme rhetoric exists on that side too, even if fringe.
A reminder of the dangerous language that can surface, yes.
All this external pressure, military confrontation, economic strain, must have significant repercussions inside Iran itself, domestic realities.
Sources highlight a significant risk for the regime, potential domestic unrest, especially if Israel continues sustained operations or the regime is perceived as failing to stand up effectively. External weakness can fuel internal dissent.
And authorities seem aware of this risk, preemptive crackdowns.
Yes. Reports of restricting internet, threatening legal action against celebratory social media posts, presumably celebrating Israeli actions or regime setbacks, shows concern about public reaction, trying to control the narrative.
This presents a dilemma for the establishment, Khamenei, and the IRGC. Prioritize revolutionary zeal abroad versus internal stability.
Absolutely. Constantly weighing those risks. Both paths pushing hard externally, appearing weak externally carries significant risks for system survival.
What's the impact on ordinary Iranians caught in this?
An anecdote captures it. The atmosphere isn't normal, a different mood, people trying to figure out what's next. A man complaining about sending his daughter to school despite the war threat shows how it hits daily life, parental anxiety.
And the desire to leave Iran seems prevalent among the young.
Yes, the source mentions a student, TK, trying to focus on college exams but feeling it's remote, pointless, wants to leave ASP but can't afford it. Personal aspirations dashed by instability, limited opportunity.
Ties back to that point about public opinion being dubious about the regime's costly ideological mission abroad.
It absolutely does. Sources strongly suggest the public is critical. This drive for regional dominance rests on a fragile internal political economic basis, increasing the risk of severe popular backlash long term.
So the regime walks a tightrope. External confrontation versus internal stability and a potentially restive population.
A very precarious balancing act.
Let's bring ourselves right up to the most recent events in the sources. The June 2025 escalation. Deeply concerning.
Characterized by a direct swapping of airstrikes, reported entering a second day of intense fighting as of June 14th.
June 13th, Israeli strikes targeting Iran's nuclear program and military sites, killing top officials and, as claimed, 9 nuclear scientists experts.
Iran retaliated overnight before June 14th, targeting Israel. Death toll from those Iranian strikes reportedly rose to 3 by June 14th. Includes someone critically hurt in a previous attack who died from wounds. Another source mentions 1 killed, 19 hurt from a direct missile impact, previously likely cumulative impact being highlighted. Iran launched its own kinetic response.
And the rhetoric accompanying this exchange has been extremely high.
Yes. Israeli Defense Minister Katz. Tehran will burn if Iran continues missile launches. Stated the dictator turns citizens into hostages, they'll pay a heavy price. A very stark threat targeting the capital.
And the IDF signaled readiness for more direct action in Iran.
Stated Air Force ready to resume striking targets in Iran. Chief of Staff Zamir and Air Force Chief Barr reportedly said, "The way to Iran has been paved. Jets will begin strikes on targets in Tehran according to the plans." Explicit statement about targeting the capital represents a significant escalation in stated intent.
Iran also issued warnings, extending them to international actors assisting Israel.
Yes, warned it would target UK, US, French bases and ships in the region if they help defend Israel again, referencing the April precedent. A clear threat to international forces if they side with Israel.
Impact on the ground. Jerusalem.
Report describes the old city quiet after recent exchanges. Barriers, IDF closures, deserted streets, shuttered shops, people following guidance not to gather despite alerts lifting. a city bracing for more.
And neighboring Jordan impacted recently, too.
Yes. The 3 injured by falling debris on June 14th unfortunately shows consequences spill over borders, hitting civilians, highlighting regional fragility.
Wow. Okay. We have taken a truly deep dive today, covered so many interconnected layers of this incredibly complex conflict.
We really have. We've walked through that timeline of escalating direct exchanges, explored the critical web of Iran's proxy strategy, discussed the deeper strategic shifts like containing Saudi Arabia,
Examined the significant international involvement, looked at the tangible economic ripples in energy and shipping, and touched on those crucial internal pressures and domestic realities within Iran.
It's abundantly clear from the sources this is far from a simple bilateral issue. It's a core flashpoint in a changing, more multipolar global landscape. Regional rivalries intersecting with global power dynamics, economic vulnerabilities, it's all woven together.
And understanding all these interconnected factors is just vital if you want to make sense of what's happening. It's not just headlines or missile counts. It's grasping the underlying forces, the strategies, the domestic calculations, the international interactions
That are fundamentally shaping regional stability and even influencing global markets and international relations at a fundamental level.
Agreed. So here's maybe a final provocative thought for you to consider after absorbing all this detail. Considering the significant domestic pressures Iran faces, that potentially fragile internal basis for its costly foreign policy.
Coupled with the intense external pressure, the explicit, alarming rhetoric and actions we've seen escalate, particularly around the nuclear program and threats to target capitals.
Does this conflict between Iran and Israel now have an inevitable, almost unavoidable trajectory towards a major regional war? A much larger scale state-on-state conflict?
Or, despite this current dangerous path, are there unseen factors? Could greater internal dissent in Iran, significant shifts in global alliances, or maybe unexpected diplomatic openings born out of a shared fear of escalation, could those still fundamentally alter its course?